Patrick Leahy once said, "Weapons that are inherently indiscriminate, whether by design or effect, should have no place in today's world." And it's because the affirmative team believes 19th century weapons don't belong in 21st century arsenals that the United States federal government should significantly reform its policy towards Russia. You need two basic pieces of information to understand our debate. One is definition and the other is fact. Carl Ching defined a cluster munition as a bomb that contains smaller bombs inside, designed to disperse over a wide area. International law outlines three tiers of cluster munitions: unreliable and reliable, referred to in academia as legacy munitions, and alternative. Unreliable munitions fail to explode upon impact up to 35% of the time and have no targeting mechanisms. Reliable munitions explode upon impact about 99% of the time, but also cannot be targeted. Alternative munitions contain laser and infrared targeting, include self-destruct mechanisms, and explode more than 99% of the time upon impact. The United States has 728.5 million cluster munitions, and experts estimate Russia also has hundreds of millions, making them the two largest stockpilers left in the world. Both countries have used munitions frequently in warfare. Russia used them in the Georgia War in 2008, and the United States notably dropped 220 million cluster munitions on the nation of Laos. Legacy cluster munitions were designed for massive conventional battlefields, not modern warfare. Their continued use is counterproductive and lethal. Thus, we give you the mandate: joint ratification. The U.S. federal government will invite Russia to sign and ratify a bilateral treaty modeled after the 2007 draft protocol on cluster munitions under discussion in Geneva by the UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. What all that just said is three main points. A, ban of unreliable. All cluster munitions used, transferred, or stockpiled must have a 99% detonation rate. B, phase out of reliable. All legacy munitions, including those with a 99% success rate, will be phased out over 10 years. Finally, C, replacement with alternative. Legacy cluster munitions will be replaced with sensor-fused munitions, or SFM. Ratification of this treaty quantitatively betters protection of civilians and our military superiority. So let's turn first of all to justification one: human life. Modern warfare demands weapons that are precise, practical, and moral. Unguided weapons hinder operations and literally become instruments of murder, at the point where there is no specific target identified and innocents are slaughtered. The A point is collateral damage. Arizona Law Review argued in 2002 that with the exception of nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and poison gas, the cluster bomb is more dangerous to civilians than any other weapon in modern warfare. Given the huge area a single bomb can cover, these weapons pose enormous risk to non-combatants, men, women, and children, who happen to be unlucky enough to fall within the trajectory of the shrapnel. The B point is socioeconomic devastation. For civilians attempting to return to normal life, dud cluster munitions pose an insurmountable barrier. Joseph Answell warned in 2010, unexploded submunitions also impact a community's ability to redevelop its physical and economic infrastructure. Civilians may not even have safe access to water or other natural resources. Farmers can't provide a livelihood or produce food for their communities when agricultural areas are littered with unexploded munitions. The loss of income for many civilians reverberates across an economy that is likely still reeling from the presence of armed conflict, unquote. This fact takes on greater significance when we consider that Russia's cluster munitions average a 35% dud rate, while U.S. munitions average a no less devastating 12% dud rate. The C point is civilians protected. Mandating alternative munitions allows fewer weapons to be used more effectively, protecting innocent lives. Daniel Gore, PhD, stated in 2010 that the sensor-fused weapon consists of 40 smart submunitions, and because of their advanced targeting capabilities, fewer of these weapons are required compared to older cluster munitions to achieve the desired effects, unquote. In fact, Bob Gravin, an explosive ordnance specialist, corroborated this year, quote, "There is not one recorded instance of the sensor-fused weapon causing a single civilian casualty. The effects on the civilian population and the humanitarian impact of this weapon system on a community is negligible," unquote. Legacy cluster munitions blindly slaughter non-combatants, while alternative weapons drastically reduce the death count. As leaders in humane modern warfare, the US and Russia have an obligation to use the most accurate and least dangerous conventional weapons in existence. There's no excuse for anything less. At the point where safer weapons technology is available, there's no option but to utilize the technology that most consistently protects innocent lives. There's no policy more practical or moral than the policy we offer you, which minimizes collateral damage and ensures that protection of innocent life is held paramount in the unfortunate reality of 21st century conflict. Justification 2, military supremacy. The A point is avoidable friendly fire. In an attempt to clear the ground of enemy combatants, the U.S. use of legacy munitions is literally killing our own servicemen and women. The Journal of Science and Engineering Ethics noted in 2010, 6% of U.S. casualties in the First Gulf War could be attributed to unexploded ordnance from U.S. cluster munitions, roughly equivalent to the number of U.S. casualties from Iraqi landmines, unquote. Our weapon systems, designed to kill the enemy, kill just as many of our personnel as the enemy systems do when they're aimed at us. Something is fundamentally wrong. The B point is extremist recruitment material. In their attempt to fight terror, the US and Russia are actually aiding in its perpetuation by their short-sighted use of indiscriminate weapons. The Landmine and Cluster Munitions Monitor reported in October of 2010 that the U.S. used 166 submunitions to attack an alleged al-Qaeda training camp in Yemen on December 17, 2009. The attack killed 55 people. 41 of them were civilians. Commenting on the Yemeni incident, Specialist Gregory Johnston of Princeton writes, "It is incredibly dangerous what the U.S. is trying to do in Yemen because it fits into al-Qaeda's strategy. They are able to make the argument that Yemen is a legitimate front for jihad, and they've been making that argument since 2007. But incidents like this are all sorts of fodder for that argument," unquote. It is in no way conducive to long-term mission success when our weapons leave lasting and devastating testaments to our interventions, reaffirming extremist anti-Americanism. The C point is safer alternative. In their 2004 report, the Human Rights Watch noted the submunition and the sensor-fused weapon are capable of independently sensing and attacking specific targets. Thus, these weapons are designed to address the problems associated with cluster munitions, the inaccuracy, and the large number of persistent duds. This trend is encouraging and should be continued, unquote. I leave you with the words of Professor T.A. Kavanaugh writing in 2010. "Acceptance of the status quo suggests a callous indifference to unnecessary human suffering, a violent cynicism towards military ethics, and a lack of imagination as to how currently available technology can better the human condition. As said of Napoleon's behavior on one occasion, it's more than wrong, it's stupid. And to use cluster munitions that result in such numerous, avoidable civilian casualties is unjust and foolish. It must stop."
Right. Well, if my judges are ready. In timer? All right. Hey Peter, how are you doing today?
Doing well, how about you?
I'm doing just fine. Just a couple questions about your speech. First off, could I have a copy of it?
Absolutely.
Thank you. When I'm talking about the treaty you're ratifying, what's the name of this treaty?
It was the 2007 draft protocol to the UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons.
Okay. Now, do you have a copy of this treaty with you?
I absolutely do. Would you like to see that?
Yes, can we have a copy, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, and you talked about the difference between reliable and unreliable weapons.
Yes.
So how do we tell the difference between reliable and unreliable before they explode?
You can't.
You can't.
Yes.
So how exactly are we going to stop using unreliable weapons and phase out reliable weapons without telling the difference?
Because neither of them have targeting systems.
Excuse me?
What I established was that legacy munitions, whether reliable or unreliable, cannot be targeted, while alternative have infrared and laser systems built in, as well as self-destruct mechanism. That's the differentiation.
All right. My question is, given your sub point A, the mandate is an immediate ban of unreliable, and your sub point B is a phase out of reliable, how do you tell the difference there?
Field tests. That's when the munitions are manufactured, they obviously test the reliability of them before they are deployed, and then the use in the field corroborates the field test data.
All right, thank you. Now moving on to talk about the bombs that the United States currently has. So you said that the United States currently has 700-something million.
720.5 million is the estimate given by Human Rights Watch in 2000.
All right, now what would your plan do to all these cluster bombs the United States currently has?
Destroy them.
Destroy them. Okay, now what funding did you provide for destroying them? How much would that cost?
It would cost about $2 billion. Our plan allocates that through normal means. That's the way Congress works.
Normal means. Okay, now can you describe where this funding will actually come from?
Congress has innumerable means of revenue generation, be that taxes, be that borrowing, be that printing more money.
Hence the national debt.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to talk about a couple more things. Now, first off about the cluster bombs. When were these cluster bombs last used by the United States?
2009 in Yemen, as I read in my speech.
All right. So how many innocent civilians have United States and Russian cluster bombs actually killed?
Approximately 11,000 to 50,000.
Okay, now these were specifically United States and Russian bombs?
United States primarily, Russia also included in that number.
All right. Now, does Russia still use cluster bombs? Or
Yes,
just the
they
United
do.
States? Okay, now when was the last time Russia used them?
2008 in Georgia.
All right, thank you. No further questions.